Hey everyone. So I just updated my Taibai rig that I released on Gumroad, and I thought I would take this opportunity to show you guys around the rig a bit, since there's a lot of controllers and features, and if you're new to Blender, it might be a bit confusing. I will say, if you've used Rigify before, or know how that works, this rig will be very familiar to you. So starting off on the rig, there's the IK controllers for the feet, and the tweak bones, which if you go into wireframe mode you can see them. They are inside the leg and they can be used to give a bit more shape to the leg and give a better silhouette when you're animating. There's also the torso control, so this moves his entire upper body, whereas this control in the middle moves the hips independently. And there's the finger controllers, so they have copy rotation on them. This means that rotating them on the axis will kind of influence the ones that are lower in the chain. And they also come with tweak bones for maybe some smears or anything of that sort. There's also this controller to give a little bit more natural shape to the hand, because the hand isn't flat, it's more like this. It has a little bit of an arc to it. So if you wanted to add a little bit more realism, you can leave like this. Although the model does have a bit of an arc by default, so you might not have to mess with this too much. But the functionality is there. And then in the back, you can control his gourd, so you can just make it rattle around, and you can even do this if you want, although normally, since this is the bottle cap, I just leave this still. And then there are all the controllers for the skirts and the tassels. These are all just simple FK controllers, so you're just gonna kind of move them one at a time. Nothing too complex. One thing I forgot is the arms also come with tweak bones, so you can use these to give a better silhouette to your character, or even try out some cartoony animation. Just depends on what you want to do. So first off, the arms by default come in an FK mode, and the legs by default come in an IK mode. If you would want to switch between FK and IK for either of the limbs, just grab any of the controllers, and there's a slider, just change it from FK to IK. There are a few features that come with the FK controllers, one of them being the IK stretch, so you can grab this and the arm will stretch to wherever the controller is. If you don't want that behavior, you can have this IK stretch slider and just set that to 0. And you can see it is no longer stretching to the controller. Another feature is the root parent controller. So by default, the behavior of IK is by rotating or moving the torso, the controller will stay in place. But if you want it to perhaps follow the rotation of the torso, then you can change this root parent to 1, and it will now follow the main root controller, or the main torso controller, I should say. There's one FK property you should be aware of, and that is the FK limb follow. So by default it will be 0, and what that means is by rotating the chest, you can see it follows the rotation of the chest 1 to 1. But if you want it to be independent of the rotation of the chest, then just take this slider, slide it to 1, and as you can see when you rotate it, it displays this behavior. One of the other features of this rig is the IK FK snapping. Personally, I use it a lot when animating, and I'll show you how it works. It's basically, if you rotate your arm like this, and then for whatever reason you want your IK to snap to the position of the FK, you can just press this button right here, and there it goes. Let's say you're in IK mode and you want the FK to snap to the IK. You press this button, and you can see the behavior is the same. And the same thing goes for the legs. All the sliders are the same: IK to FK, root parent, IK stretch, all of that. Some of the features that come with it is the head follow and the neck follow. So the default behavior, as you can see, is by rotating the chest. The head and neck will be sort of independent of the rotation of the chest. If you want them to follow completely, just take these sliders and set them both to 0. Personally, I like to have a bit of neck follow because I think it gives a bit of organic motion when rotating the chest. If you want it to be completely independent of the rotation of the chest, then just set both of the sliders to 1. Moving on to the face, there are 2 properties you should be aware of, one of them being the mouth lock. So by default, when rotating or translating the jaw, the mouth will open. If you want it to stay closed no matter what, just select the slider, set it to 1, and now you can see anytime you move the jaw, the mouth will stay closed. The other feature is the eyes follow. So the default behavior is rotating the head leads to the eyes following wherever you point the head. If you don't want that behavior, select the eye controller and then set the eyes follow slider to 0, and you can see as you move the head, the eyes stay in place. The rest of the features are contained in this properties cog up above his head. It has a few properties which I'm going to show you. So the first couple of properties are the mask functions. So taking these sliders, you can hide different parts of his body. So you can hide his arms, his body itself, the legs, and any object with a simulation on it, which is the skirt and the hair. I'm going to go in depth a little bit about the mask arms and the mask sim object because they are a bit different from the mask body and mask legs. So as you can see, if I set this to less than 1 but greater than 0, the fluffy bits on his arm will stay there, but if you set it to 1, they will disappear. Similarly, if you set this to greater than 0 but less than 1, the skirt will disappear, but the hair will stay there. So if you don't want to go through the trouble of animating the skirt, you can just hide the skirt itself and just animate the hair. If you don't want to animate the hair either, you can make them bald. The other feature is the simulation switcher. So by default, the simulation will be off because the simulation is bad, but if for whatever reason you wanted to use it, maybe he's doing a bit of subtle movements, then you can take this switch right here and just set it from 0 to 1, and as you can see, there's now a bit of a simulation on his clothes. The final feature is the snapping feature for the sheath and the sword. So if you hover over the things here, you can get a quick explanation of what number does which snapping. So by default, the sheath comes free from the rig. This means that moving the rig does not affect the movement of the sheath. But then if you change this to 1, you can snap it to his right hand. Change it to 2, you can snap it to his left hand. Change it to 3, you can snap it to his hip. And 4, you can snap it to his back. Similarly, you can snap the sword to different places on his body. So by default, it will be 1, which means it is attached to the sheath. But you can set it to 0 for it to be freed from the sheath and the character rig. You can set it to 2 to snap to his right hand, and 3 to snap to his left hand. So now I'm going to show you guys a bit about the sword rig. It's pretty simple, but it does have a few features. So for one, there is the bone that controls the sheath, and right now the sword is snapped to the sheath, which is why moving the sheath moves the sword itself. I'm going to hide the sheath so I can show you guys the sword. So you can rotate the sword by its handle using the main root controller down here, but there's also this controller at the tip of the sword. This is the pivot controller, and by default it'll be here, and you can rotate the sword by its tip, but you can also move it further into the sword, and rotating it will cause it to rotate from that position. So if you wanted to do a spinning sword throw like I did in my animation, this is how I did it. It should be noted that in order to change the position of the pivot, you should have it rotated by 0 degrees or any multiple of 360 degrees. This is because you can see if you rotate it here and then try to move the pivot, it displays some weird behavior. I'm not sure how to fix it. Maybe in a future update it'll be fixed, but for now, that's what you're gonna have to do. Now I'm gonna give you guys a tip for animating the snaps because these aren't perfect controllers. These are just good enough for what I need. So let's say you wanna animate him tossing his sword from his right hand to his left hand. Okay, so this is the animation we're going to be using. He's just going to throw his sword from his right hand to his left hand. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the properties, cog above his head, and we're going to key the sword snap feature. Then we're going to select the sword, select the root controller, and keyframe that as well. Then we're going to go to the apex of his arm throw, key the root again, and then also key the sword snap again. Then we're going to go 1 frame after that, and we're going to set the sword snap property to 0 for free, which means it's no longer attached to the rig. And you can see what happens is it snaps to the world origin, and that's because that's where it is in its local space. So now what we're gonna have to do is grab the root of the sword and just maybe set it here. Let's just say if it traveled a little bit after he threw it, and then we're gonna go to the apex of his arm, which is right here. Let's just go over here and maybe rotate it a bit, maybe like twist it or something. Just rotate it, something like this, right before, and make it look like right before he's about to catch it. Then keyframe the root of the sword. Then go to the properties panel, keyframe the sword snap again, go 1 frame after, then set it to the right hand snap, left hand snap, which I believe is 3. And then you can see, because I changed what because I changed the sword location in its local space, it's going to travel. But you can just fix that by clearing all the transformations on the sword, and it will return to the hand. So now if we look at the animation, we can see that he tosses the sword and then he grabs it again. And this is the basic technique for doing a sword throw. That's the technique I used when doing my animation. If you want an easier method to do this, there is a great add-on by Guilty Ghost called Snap Constraints, I believe. And it's on the Blender Market for $20. I'll have a link in the description below. It should be noted that all the bones by default come in an XYZ Euler rotation mode because that is personally what I like to animate in. If you would want to change that rotation mode to something like a quaternion or maybe even a different Euler rotation mode, then what you're going to have to do is change the rotation mode of these controllers. Do not change the rotation mode of any of the bones in these deform layers, the MHC layer or the ORG layer. Doing that will break the constraints and drivers on the bones. To switch the rotation mode is a bit of a process. I'm going to show you how it would be done right now. So first you're going to want to enable visibility on all the bones, and then you want to select all of the main controllers. So you can select this cog, the arrow, each of the FK controllers, and the main IK controller. And then just press Ctrl R and select whatever rotation mode you want. When you do change, all of the sliders and the snapping functions should still work. It's just important that you change the rotation mode of all of the controllers that are associated with whichever limb you want. The same thing goes for the legs, so you can just select all of the leg controllers, then change them to quaternion or YXZ Euler or whatever you want. So the last thing I'm going to show you guys is how to append the rig to another file if you want to use them and maybe he's going to fight a character or something. So to do it, what you're going to want to do is go to File and Append, and then you're going to want to find where you set the Blender file. So for me, it's going to be in the Taibai folder, and you just select the blend file. Then you're going to first append the UI, the rig UI. Then you're going to append again, and append the collection enabled append, and then everything should show up for you. Then you want to go to the scripting panel, select the script, and just run the script, and then you should be good for business. And that is the rig. So I hope you guys can enjoy it. If you make any animations with it, feel free to tag me on Twitter @Sorenin422. I'd love to see it. Later.